Tens of thousands of people detained during the ongoing uprising in Iran will face horrific torture and sexual violence in prison.
In 1979, millions of Iranians celebrated the so-called liberation, but for half of the population, it became a living hell wrapped up in a propaganda machine. Here's how women were punished, belittled, and stripped of their basic human rights under the Iranian regime. Before 1979.
Iran, a country brimming with energy, exploding with construction and development, a dynamic state with a thriving capital.
Just before 1979, Iranian women had rights that were on par with those in the United States. They could vote, run for political office, and even hold positions across every sector, including medicine, law, education, and government. We can even see images and videos from before the Iranian Revolution, with most women wearing westernized clothes, and no one would bat an eye at them. There were even women sitting in parliament and occupying senior administrative roles. The legal framework, particularly the family protection law, gave them the right to initiate divorce and limited polygamy. The minimum marriage age for girls was set at 18, which is the legal standard today in most countries. While these weren't perfect conditions, they still represented a legal recognition that women's rights and their opinions matter. Women could walk down Tehran Street in a miniskirt or traditional dress, and it was all their choice. Universities were co-educational, and movie theaters showed Western films. Cafes were all mixed gender, and the conversations were about political art and the future. Then came the reign of Ayatollah Khomeini, who returned from 14 years of exile, and his regime changed everything for years to come, unless the Persian people got sick of it. Khomeini's return.
Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran on February 1st, 1979. Several million people showed up to greet him.
On February 1st, 1979, Khomeini's plane touched down in Tehran, and it would change everything. Millions lined up in the street to welcome him as the liberator who would free Iran from the monarchy and all foreign influence. But what they got instead was a different kind of suppression, one that would change not just the political thought, but the personal behavior down to the smallest detail. Within a couple of months, Khomeini moved to dismantle women's legal protection, with a precision that is quite smart, to be fair. He lowered the minimum marriage age for girls from 18 to just 9 years old. He removed women from judgeship, and he also pushed them down from holding high political office positions. The revolution that promised justice was already stripping half of its population before people realized what was happening. Then came March 7th, 1979. Just weeks after getting into power, Khomeini made his move on women's appearance, and frankly, it was a shame. He announced that all women working in government offices must wear the Islamic hijab. He framed uncovered hair as immoral, describing it as a form of nakedness that not only corrupted society, but also went against the religion that he was following. This wasn't just a suggestion or recommendation, it was forced and became a command from the highest authority in the new Islamic Republic. The impact here was immediate and shocking. Government buildings became enforcement instantly. Women who arrived at work without the head covering were turned away at the door, not getting welcomed into the workplace that they worked so hard for. For many Iranians, this came as a complete surprise. Until that moment, Khomeini didn't explicitly state that hijab would be compulsory. Many women believed religious dress should remain a personal choice, and that belief was gone after March 7 because it would become the biggest suppression of the century. 6 days of protest.
Protesters attacked a police station last night about 200 miles south of Tehran.
It was right the next day, on March 8, 1975, which was International Women's Day, when thousands of women flooded onto the streets of Tehran. The timing wasn't coincidental either. It was direct resistance to the hijab forcing, and women from every background joined, whether it was students, professionals, mothers, religious women, or even secular women. They united because they were furious about what the revolution was stealing from them. They marched openly without hijab, fully aware of what they were defining. They would carry banners and shout slogans, wanting freedom. This wasn't a small gathering that could easily be ignored, but it was a huge movement. Then came the pro-Khomeini militiamen and the Revolutionary Guard, who confronted them and surrounded the crowds, shouted threats, and even fired warning shots into the air to intimidate everyone. Despite the violence and threat to these women, they didn't really back down. They returned after the day for 6 days straight, from March 8 through March 14, 1979. This became the first major public protest against the Islamic Republic, and it caught the authorities completely off guard. For a brief moment, it seemed like the pressure was working, as Khomeini's deputies announced the hijab rule would be temporarily suspended. Many women saw this as a victory. They believed that the state listened to them and was happy to comply with them. However, they were wrong. This pause was strategic, and hell was coming for these women once the protests faded and public attention shifted. Hardliners inside the regime became reorganized by the mid-1980s. Enforcement returned with far more force and zero tolerance, while also introducing punishment. The punishment.
Rules written by the state fear enforced by force. Silence demanded by law. Today, perhaps that prison is breaking.
Then came perhaps the darkest moment of Iran, and especially for women, where revolutionary courts and Islamic committees were established across Iran with enormous power and almost no checks and balances. Their mandate was to enforce moral behavior, and women were the primary targets. One of the earliest documented cases came just 11 days after the hijab enforcement on March 19, 1979. The Iranian newspaper Kayhan reported that in the northern city of Rutsar, a married woman with 3 children who had left her husband was arrested along with the man she ran away with. The revolutionary court sentenced her to 50 lashes and him to 100 lashes for an inappropriate relationship. The punishment was carried out publicly on a street in Rutsar, where crowds gathered and watched as the mother of 3 was whipped in front of them. In the same month, while women protested in Tehran, a public flogging occurred in Isfahan, where 3 people, including 2 men and 1 woman, were accused of adultery and received 100 lashes each. They were flogged in the street, forced to repent publicly, and only then were they released. These early cases established that there was more brutality coming, and they were definitely right. Fearful lifestyle. Before we talk about the fear in women's daily life, please subscribe to the channel because that's where it gets really dark. By late 1979 and in 1980, flogging was becoming a routine. Revolutionary guards and committees of the Islamic Revolution were patrolling neighborhood streets and public spaces with authority that shouldn't have been given to them in the first place. They were aggressive and often quite violent. Young couples were targeted first for simply being near each other. Holding hands or sitting close was not a thing anymore, not even in the cinema, and it could result in beating or detention. Victims were tied to posts in public squares and whipped in front of crowds that were sometimes forced to watch. The speed of sentencing was also terrifying. Revolutionary courts issued punishment within days of arrest, with almost no investigation, and without giving the person any time to defend themselves. An accusation alone could be enough. Confessions were quickly extracted through torture, and even if someone was innocent, they would just say it anyway, just to get rid of the pain. Women watched their surroundings constantly. Mothers warned daughters obsessively, and people whispered about vigilantes who were always on the street corners. Even attending a private party became dangerous if someone reported it, and ordinary social life became oppressed to the level where all the people had gone back to medieval times. It was in 1980 and 1981 that the revolutionary chaos was crystallizing into something permanent. A new constitution was adopted with Sharia, which is the Islamic law at the core. Religion wasn't just a moral guide anymore. It was forced to the highest points and peaks of Iran. In July 1980, new orders also targeted women's employment directly. Any woman who was attempting to enter a government office without covering her hair was stopped at the door by guards. They weren't warned or fined. They were simply turned away and told that they could not return unless they complied with the dress code for women who depended on all their jobs. Refusing hijab now meant permanently risking their employment and sometimes even their lives.
Social media is subjecting Norway's ultra-strict attitude with asylum seekers to public trial after an Iranian woman was deported and given 80 lashes for allegedly consuming alcohol.
By 1981, the rule extended beyond government buildings, and hijab became mandatory in all public spaces, including streets, buses, shops, parks, and everywhere. There were even checkpoints that appeared where officers stopped women to inspect their clothing. A woman's wear was now determined by whether she could or could not move throughout the city. Meanwhile, in most remote areas during the week, oversight stoning also returned. In 1986, one of the most infamous cases occurred when a 35-year-old village woman who was accused of adultery had something coming. Her husband wanted to marry a teenage girl, and so saw her as an obstacle in a small village court under pressure and intimidation. This girl was sentenced to death by stoning. In 1986, villagers gathered to carry out the sentence, which was a painful moment for the girl. There was also a book and film called The Stoning of Soraya M., which was a pseudonym for the girl. Even punishments short of executions were huge. A sentence of several hundred lashes could permanently damage a person's body, but the psychological toll here was even more devastating. Khomeini's legacy. In June 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini died. Millions mourned him publicly with dramatic displays of grief, but privately, many Iranians reflected on how much pain he brought to them. By then, an entire generation had grown up knowing nothing else. Children were born around the time of the revolution and entered adulthood, having their entire lives and the lives of their parents changed. They were all under control and surveilled. The system that Khomeini built didn't end with his death at all. It continues almost unchanged. The dress code and all the morality law he'd introduced remained part of Iranian law for decades. The campaign of the 1980s wasn't forgotten, because women remembered the street patrols, the arrests, the public punishments, and other things. Human rights reports documented that in the years after Khomeini's death, thousands of Iranian women were arrested simply because of their clothing. Their method stayed identical. Women were slapped or even beaten by those policemen, dragged into vans with catch poles, jailed, and even sentenced to lashing. These punishments were not even treated as a temporary crackdown or emergency measures. They became a normal part of the Iranian regime. Over time, some of Khomeini's harshest policies were softened slightly. Later leaders even eased certain rules in response to internal pressure and international criticism, but the core of the system was still the same. What Khomeini left behind wasn't just a legal framework, but it was a culture of fear, and making sure that women would suffer the most amount of pain just for expressing themselves however they want. It still follows them step by step through the street. Every decision about what to wear, where to go, who to see, and where to date is enforced. After Khomeini died, his son Khamenei came into power, and even though he was known as being more lenient than his father, the Iranian regime still largely felt the same. Not very long ago, many protesters were killed and shot just because they were out there protesting for their basic rights. Do you think this brutality is justified in any shape, way, or form? Let us know in the comments down below, and subscribe to the channel because we covered the deepest, darkest secrets of our world.